John Lennon once said, "If you tried to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry." In 1984, Chuck Berry was honored with Grammy's Lifetime Achievement Award. In 1986, he was in the first class of inductees to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They say that Chuck Berry is the father of rock and roll. Well, if that is the case, he fathered some really creepy guys, and he would be creep numero uno. Chuck Berry is one of those people who has a complicated past. He left behind a legacy of undeniable accomplishments, and at the same time, a history of sex abuse scandals which have made him a difficult figure to celebrate for many people, and understandably so. A lot of people probably feel that way about a number of Chuck Berry's fellow Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees from 1986. Among those names were Elvis Presley, James Brown, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Sam Cooke. All of these men have some dark details in their past, many involving sexual impropriety. And we might discuss some of those other Rock and Roll Hall of Famers at a later date on this channel, but today it's all about Chuck Berry. Let's get into it. But first, if you like these videos about the most scandalous people from yesteryear who make the Hot Mess History with Ty Said What Ty Said channel a time capsule for the culture, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can know every time that I upload one of these videos or every time that I live stream. And comment "I subscribed" in the comment section so that I can say hello to you. Now, on to why you are here. Chuck Berry is one of rock and roll music's pioneers. He wrote his own music. He wrote his own lyrics. He played the guitar extremely well and in a way that was new and exciting to teens all across America who were watching him on their black and white TV sets. In the 1950s and 60s, he was pioneering a whole new sound that would be imitated by many. Imitation was one thing, but flat out copying him was another. In 1961, Chuck Berry released his song called "Sweet Little 16", an ode to a teenage fan wearing high-heeled shoes. Well, 2 years later, the Beach Boys took Berry's same exact music and fitted it with new words, calling their song "Surfin' USA". It would become one of their greatest hits ever. Chuck Berry was not happy about the Beach Boys' copycat music at all, and immediately threatened to sue them for plagiarism. The parties came to an agreement to properly give Berry a co-writing credit on the song. In 2015, Brian Wilson admitted in a Los Angeles Times interview, "I just took Sweet Little 16 and rewrote it into something of our own." For those who are not already familiar with both songs, if you listen to them, you will hear the same song. But a difference in the lyrics is noticeable too. The stolen Beach Boys version is about everybody being able to have a beach where they can go surfing and have fun with their friends. Chuck Berry's original version has some lyrics that seem questionable when one takes into consideration that he was a 35-year-old man singing about a 16-year-old girl in high-heeled shoes. The lyrics from one of the verses are, "Sweet little 16, she's got the grown-up blues. Tight dresses and lipstick, she's sporting high-heel shoes." Is it not odd to think of a 30-something-year-old man penning these lyrics about a school-aged girl? Ironically enough, the song was re-recorded and released by Jerry Lee Lewis in 1969. Of course, a song about a teen girl would be right up his alley. But what if the song had been called "Sweet Little 14"? Might people have felt differently about it, even back in 1961? Because it was in 1961 that Chuck Berry was sentenced to 3 years in prison for transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines and engaging in a sexual relationship with her. Her name was Janice Escalante. Here are some of the details from that sordid occurrence. Chuck Berry's attorney said that he believed that Chuck did not have sex with Janice because he, the attorney, thought that she was ugly and homely. Chuck said that Janice looked like his mother's younger sister, but did admit in his autobiography to wanting to have sex with her. Both Berry and the 14-year-old Escalante agreed on a few details during the trial: that they had met in December of 1959 in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and that they had traveled together for a week through 5 states, ending up in St. Louis, and that once there, Janice worked for Berry for 10 days in his club that he owned called Club Bandstand. They seemed to disagree about everything else. The main questions that needed to be answered to make a decision about Chuck Berry's guilt or innocence were these. 1. Why had he brought Janice so far away from home? And 2. Did he rape her on any part of their journey or once they reached the final destination, which was his home in St. Louis? Chuck was charged under the Mann Act, which does not allow transportation of girls and women across state lines for immoral practices or debauchery. This trial was not his first rodeo in court. When Berry was only 18, he was convicted of armed robbery and ended up serving 3 years in prison. And just 3 months before meeting the 14-year-old Janice, he had a court date for a disorderly conduct charge that he received for asking a white girl in Mississippi for a date. Janice was Native American, 3/4 Apache and 1/4 Yuma. So, in Chuck Berry's complete racial ignorance, he called this ordeal the Indian trial, which was not to be confused with what he called the French trial. That was yet another Mann Act charge that he was facing, involving his transporting a 17-year-old girl of French ancestry across state lines for immoral purposes in the summer of 1958. The U.S. attorney told him that after he was caught with the French girl, that there would only be a trial if he got himself involved in a similar incident. Well, he was clearly a musical genius, but the fact that only 1 year later he was caught in a similar incident with an even younger girl speaks to his stupidity as well as his depravity. Berry didn't seem to take the trial seriously at all. He conducted himself like an old fool. During witness testimony, he would read Time magazine. When it was Janice's turn to take the stand, she explained that she met Chuck Berry and his band when they came to Ciudad Juarez to perform at a concert. She was very soft-spoken, which is what attracted Chuck to her, according to his words in his autobiography. But during the trial, that quality about herself proved to only be an annoyance to the lawyers and the judge, who kept asking her to repeat herself and to speak up. The judge kept calling her this Indian girl, as in, I can't hear this Indian girl. The judge mostly referred to Berry as this Negro. One source says he intentionally slurred it to make it sound like the N-word. Nevertheless, Janice acted as a tour guide for the band that night. At some point, Chuck Berry asked her if she had ever done any prostituting before. She answered that yes, she had. He asked her if she'd like to reform her life, and she said that yes, she would. He came up with the brilliant idea of taking her back home with him to St. Louis to appropriate her culture, working as a hostess at his club bandstand in what he called Indian attire. She would be a drawing attraction, dressed in a feather headdress and all. The arrangement that they made was that Janice would join him on tour and sell photos at his shows to earn the money to get to St. Louis. Photos like this one. This was literally one of the pictures that she sold. Oddly enough, his fans didn't buy too many of these. Some nights, not even one was sold. It seems that Chuck spent a good part of his life taking photographs without a shirt. I suppose that some woman, or girl, at some point in his life told him that his body was good looking. Just days after making their arrangement, Janice hit the road with Berry and his band. On the way from El Paso to Arizona, she and Berry sat in the back seat of his Cadillac with his arm across her stomach while they had coats over their bodies. The whole gang arrived in Tucson, Arizona, and Chuck booked rooms for everyone at the Sands Motor Hotel. Only 2 rooms for his band, Janice, and himself. They were the last 2 vacancies that the motel had. He and Janice were to share a room, and the rest of the band shared an adjoining room. In the room that he had booked for himself and Janice, there were 2 beds. He testified that he had to share a room with her because he couldn't let her sleep in the car, and that they had shared a room, not a bed. Janice, however, testified that not only did they share a bed, but they showered together before she took the bed closest to the bathroom, and he never got in the other bed, but instead got into the same bed with her. She went on to say that he had intercourse with her that night, and the following morning he ordered pork chops for breakfast and answered the door shirtless when the bellhop brought his food to the room. Then he took inappropriate photos of her being Janice. When it was Barry's turn to take the stand, he admitted to the photos and to answering the door only half-dressed. He didn't admit to showering with or having intercourse with Janice. Bottom line, he only admitted to what someone could verify. There was proof of the photos, and the bellhop could also corroborate Janice's testimony about Barry being half naked. But what went on behind that closed door to their room was simply he said, she said, and the judge and jury would have to decide on who they believed. According to Janice's testimony, that was the first time out of more than a dozen within a 2-week span that Chuck Berry engaged in sexual intercourse with her. The following night, Berry brought back 2 groupies to the adjoining room for the band. Janice went back to the room that she had shared with Berry the night before. She said that around 3 or 4 in the morning, Berry came and got back into bed with her and had sex with her again. His band member, Davis, slept in the other bed in their room. Then, on the way to Santa Fe, New Mexico, Berry was driving for a long stretch with Janice in the front seat of his Cadillac. He asked his bandmates to switch places and let him stretch his legs in the back seat. Since he was switching, so was Janice. She testified that he had intercourse with her in the back seat while his bandmate was driving to New Mexico. Chuck denied that as well, claiming that because his guitar was in the back seat with them, that there wasn't enough room for having sex. After the band played their gig in Santa Fe, they got on the road to Denver at about 4 o'clock in the morning. Once again, Janice said that they had, quote, another sexual relationship in the back seat. She said, he asked me to make love to him, which I did not. The attorney asked, what did he mean? She replied, he meant for me to go down on him. When they finally arrived in Denver, they checked into the Drexel Hotel. Berry used a fake name at check-in because he didn't want his fans to be able to track him down. The name he used for Escalante and himself was Mr. and Mrs. Janet Johnson. Johnson was the last name of one of his bandmates. Janet was the 14-year-old's first name, in Chuck's mind. He stated, quote, I used her first name and Johnny's last name, what I thought was her first name. I never knew her last name until this case came up. But the first part of her name I thought was Janet. That's why I put Janet Johnson. So, after having had relations with her multiple times, he finally learned the teenager's name first and last during the trial. While in Denver, Chuck kept Janice in the hotel room when he went to play his gig. The hotel clerk testified that when Berry returned to the hotel, he asked her if his wife was still in their room, referring to Janice. This time, Berry requested a room with only one bed. Janice was asleep in it by the time that he got back to the hotel. According to her testimony, he got into bed with her and they, quote, had another sexual relationship. Berry testified the opposite. He said that he slept on the floor in his clothes. However, his autobiography tells a different story. He never went as far as admitting his guilt with Janice, but he did admit to wanting to sleep with her that night. He wrote that she jumped into bed with him, and he managed to postpone the joys, hoping that he would have another opportunity to do it with her later. Eventually, Janice made it to St. Louis, thankful for the opportunity to work and start a new life. Janice finished the car ride with the band. Chuck didn't. At some point in the journey, he caught a flight the rest of the way to St. Louis, and a bandmate brought Janice to one of his properties that he had previously shared with his wife, the Meta, and their children. See how pretty his wife is? And she stayed with him until the end. You can see for yourself how well she wore that. Francine Gilliam was the lady who ran his nightclub. She was also another person who the clerk from the Drexel Hotel recognized as someone else who Chuck Berry had called his wife when he checked in. So it's possible that he had a sexual history with her as well, but she wasn't a minor. She was 21 at this time. Francine had purchased a quote-unquote Indian costume for Janice to wear while she was hostessing and checking hats. In Chuck's mind, it was a hit. She was just the novelty that he wanted for his club. To make a very long story short, Janice's experience working at the club was not a good one, nor was it a long one. She worked there for roughly 10 days and slept in Chuck's house where he kept Francine. She testified that out of her 11 or 10 days there, that Chuck Berry had sex with her 9 or 10 times, almost every night. When she and Chuck had had enough of each other, he ended up sending her away with a bus ticket to return home. She encountered a strange man at the bus station whom she told about Chuck Berry bringing her there, and that she didn't want to go back home. The stranger took her back to Chuck's club, where she drank and demanded to see Chuck. Then Davis, his band member, according to his own testimony, took her out of the club to calm her down, and he had sex with her as well at the Deluxe Hotel in St. Louis, not to be confused with the Deluxe Hotel in Denver that was already mentioned. When all was said and done, Chuck was found guilty of transporting. He bent over and cried as the judge delivered his sentence. The judge told him, quote, "Don't go through that maudlin exhibition in my presence. I am not impressed by it. I have seen your kind before. I would not turn that man loose to go out and prey on a lot of ignorant Indian girls and colored girls, and white girls, if any. I would not have that on my soul." End quote. Then Chuck appealed and was freed from prison pending his retrial that he was granted due to the judge's racist remarks. Then, at the retrial, Berry, who was clearly an idiot when it came to personal life decisions, wrote, "The courtroom was jam-packed, as if I was indicted to strum out a string of rock and roll hits." Janice was now 15, and she spoke a little more loudly. And if that first judge had been racist against Chuck Berry, Chuck Berry's attorney was racist against Janice. Even though she told the court the same story that she had told at the first trial, Berry's attorney said that Janice was, quote, "dumb like a fox. Everything we have learned about Indians being cunning is true." End quote. Celebrity or not, neither the judge nor the jury believed Chuck Berry. When all was said and done, he was found guilty and sentenced to 3 years in prison and fined $5,000, which is the equivalent of $48,000 in today's 2022 money. He was finally driven to prison in February of 1962. He was released after 23 months and then went on to deny to the press that he had ever been convicted. Then, in 1979, Berry was convicted of tax evasion and had to serve another 4 months in prison. He lived his last years proving that he never outgrew his degenerate mindset. In 1987, he released his autobiography, and this was the cover. There's a little something for you, ladies. Ick. In the same year that he released his book, he was also arrested for assaulting a woman at Gramercy Park Hotel. The woman was described as a 30-year-old willowy blonde who had been dating him. He was 62 at this time and, by the way, still married. He allegedly struck her in her mouth, causing an injury that required 5 stitches to heal the open wound. Then, in 1990, he was charged with child abuse after a police raid on his house reportedly turned up pornographic videos of underage girls. And later that same year, a class action lawsuit was brought against Chuck Berry for making secret video recordings of women in the restroom of a restaurant that he owned. Criminal charges were brought against him because some of the video recordings were of minors. Surprise, surprise. He settled out of court, which did not make anyone believe in his innocence. If you want to take a look at some of his lyrics for yourself, so that you can try to figure out why a 30-something-year-old guy was always writing and singing about teen girls, you can check out his songs called Our Little Rendezvous, Brenda Lee, and frankly half of his catalog. Or you can check out his clever little ditty called My Ding-a-Ling, which is about exactly what you think it's about. Barry died in 2017, leaving behind a double-edged legacy. He is rock and roll. Some say that he is the man who created it. Others say that he was the man who perfected it. He was also a giant old pervert who was obsessed with underage girls and his friggin' wee-wee. Gross. Chuck Berry was finally sent off to prison for violating the Mann Act. But he wasn't the first one, and he won't be the last. Do you know who was the first person found guilty of violating the Mann Act? Jack Johnson. And I have published a video about that situation that you can see here. I will also leave a link to it in the description box. My sources for this story are PhoenixNewsTimes.com, TheOutline.com, JPRobinsonMedium.com, The Washington Post Archives 1990, and the El Paso Herald Post Archives 1961. If you want text notifications so that you can get a text 15 minutes before I release a video or 15 minutes before I live stream, simply send a text to 786-632-2135 to let me know that you want text, and you will get an outgoing text message 15 minutes before I have a new video release. If you have a business, product, service, YouTube channel, or social media account that you would like to promote on my channel, email me at taiwan@taisaidwhattaisaid.com to get rates for advertising on my community tab, my live streams, and or my edited videos, just like this one. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Tai Said What Tai Said channel. Please leave a thumbs up and comment so that we can get a discussion going. And share this video on all of your social media, especially your Facebook. That really helps me out a lot. And subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can know when my next video is ready for you. And if you don't like what I'm saying, but you love it, feel free to hit that applaud button just below your video screen there and send me some
donations.
Yeah, baby. See you on the next video.